Hi, I'm Greg Pollock, and in this lesson we're going to be taking a deeper dive into Vue mutations and actions. Specifically, we'll look in our example app and we'll fetch our list of events using Vuex. We'll deal with pagination with Vuex, and we'll fetch a single event with Vuex for our event show component in our example app. Let's jump into it. First up, let's implement Vuex inside our event list component. Our list page currently looks like this, and let's read through some of the code. Inside of our event list component, we're printing out an event card for each of the events in our array. Then inside our script tag, we're including the event card component and including our event service, where we do our API calls. Then our reactive data is simply our events array. And finally, inside the created lifecycle hook, we call our event service to get events from our API. What returns in our response, we set to our events array. We need to move this service into Vuex. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this. We'll paste it in a minute. Next, we'll dive into our store.js file, where we have our Vuex code. You can see here at the top, we already have an events array. So we already have the state for our event list. Next, we need to add a mutation called setEvents, which will take the state and our events array, that's our payload, and it will simply set the state. Now we need to create an action. We'll call our action fetchEvents, pass in our context object so we have access to our mutations, and then we'll paste in what we cut from our event list. We'll call a mutation that we just created, setEvents, sending in the payload of response data, which is our list of events. That's all we have to do here. Now we need to make a few changes inside event list. First, we can delete the event service import statement, since we're using that inside of Vuex now. I'll import the map state helper from Vuex. I can delete our reactive data, since we're using the Vuex state now. And inside our created lifecycle hook, that is where I will dispatch our fetchEvents action. Then inside of computed, I'll use the map state helper to get access to our events state. To review, we call our action from inside the created lifecycle hook. We get access to our state using the map state helper, and we're printing out one event card for each item in this array. If we look back into our browser, everything is working just like before, except this time we're using Vuex. Let's review our Vuex diagram. Inside of our events list component, we're dispatching our fetchEvents action. Inside this action, we call our API, we retrieve the data, and then commit a mutation. This mutation sets our events state. Our component uses this state, which lists out all of our events. Next up, let's think about how we might do pagination with Vuex. If we Google Vue Mastery, we can see there's only 521,000 results. So it's a good thing we have some pagination going on here. And as a Vue developer, at some point, you're going to have a big list. You'll need to do pagination too. So how might we implement this with our example app? Our example app is using JSON server to mock out our API. And if we read its documentation, we'll see that we can use page and limit to paginate our returned data. Which means in our app, we can call /events. And if we send in limit3 page 2, like you see here, what that means is it will limit to 3 events returned per page, and it will only show the events that would be on page 2. Let's jump into our app, but remember this URL. The first thing I'm going to do here is go into our data in db.json, and I'm going to paste in a bunch more events, so we have some events to paginate through. Then, inside event service, I need to change this API call. When we call getEvents, we need to send in 2 parameters per page and the current page we're on. Then we'll add 2 URL query parameters, limit, which is set to per page, and the current page we're on, which is set to the value of page. Next, we'll need to open up our store.js and go to our fetch events action. We need to make a few changes. First, we're going to add a payload to this action. It'll be per page and page, and that will just pass into our service to do our API call. Now you might be wondering here, why is this payload surrounded by curly braces? Well, the payload in both actions and mutations can be a single variable, like we've used before, or it can be an object. So here we're passing an object which has two properties, per page and page. Next, we'll go to our event list component. And inside here, we'll pass in a payload of per page, which we'll just hard code to 3 per page for now. But the question is, how do we send in a URL query parameter and access that here so we know what page we're on? We want our URL to look something like this, and we need access to that query parameter. To do this, we're going to create a computed property called page. This will return a value, which is either the routes query page value, or if there's no URL query parameters, assume we're on the first page. Now inside our action payload, we can simply access this page computed property. If we look inside of our browser and we go to page 2, we can see that sure enough, it loads up the events for page 2 and page 3 with 3 events per page. To navigate through our different event pages, let's add some previous and next links. So under our list, we'll use the router link component to create links that'll go to our event list. We need to specify the query parameter of page. The previous one will be page -1. We'll use rel prev, that's for Google to know we're paginating. And we'll call that previous page. And now to link to our next page, I'll just copy paste the first router link, and this will go to the next page. So page +1, it'll be rel next, and then next page. And I don't want to print out the previous page if I'm on the first page. So I can say if page not equal to 1, then go ahead and print previous page. Now if we jump into our browser, we can see that we have our links, but something strange is happening. When we click them, it's changing the URL, but our event listing isn't getting updated. But if we go directly to a page, it does get updated. What's happening here is the component isn't reloading when we navigate. It's like we're clicking the same link and expecting something different to happen. You know, when you click home on a web page, then you click home again, Vue knows not to reload the component because you're already on the page you're trying to get to. That's what's happening here. The component isn't getting reloaded. There's 2 ways we can solve this in Vue. The first is by watching the page computed property and then calling fetch event when it changes. And the second is to reload components when the URL changes, including when the query parameters change. We'll solve this problem the second way. We can do this by going into our app.view. And inside our router view component, we'll add key equals route.fullPath. And that ensures that components get reloaded when the URL changes, including query parameters. Now if we jump back into our browser, now when we go to next and previous, everything works as we would hope. However, next page never goes away. So we can keep on hitting next page and get to blank pages. That's not good. We need to know how many total events we have. That way we can calculate when we're on the last page and not show that next page. Let's start thinking about how we would solve this, although I'm not going to give you the full solution. If we look inside the Network tab on DevTools, we can see our API call. And if we scroll down, we can see that it has a header of X total count. So JSON server is sending us the total events in the response header. We just need to access it. How might we print this out inside of our action? Well, for now, we'll just log this to the console. We'll say total events are, and then we'll print out the response header X total count. Back in the browser, we can see it printed out total events are 10. Great. The rest of the solution is extra credit. So in a minute, I'm going to tell you to pause the video. And if you like learning by doing, I suggest you try to solve this problem. So we need to only show the next page link if we have one. So what do we need to do? One way you could solve the problem is by following these steps. We could save events total to our state, create a mutation to set the state, then call that mutation from fetch events, and then lastly, we need to update event view list. So we only print out the next link when we're not on the last page. How might we know when to display the next link? Well, here's the logic. If our events total is greater than the current page we're on times 3, then we want to display the next link. Go ahead and pause the video now if you want to try this extra credit. You can download the code if you need to in the lesson resources, where I also have the solution. Before we move on, I want to point out that our API gets called on every events page, even if we viewed that page before, which may be the behavior we want in our application. So it's always fresh. We're always fetching the latest and greatest. However, if we're dealing with millions and millions of users, we may want to employ some sort of caching mechanism, which we could on the server side or even on the client side using Vue, which is out of scope for this course, but there are a few ways to do this in Vue if you need to. Next, we're going to implement our show event page, which currently looks something like this. As we saw on our list, we need to first make sure we have a place to store the state. Then we need to create a mutation to manipulate the state. And lastly, we need to create an action which calls our API and then our mutation. Back inside our code, inside event show, you can see our service call, which again, we're going to cut so that we can move it into Vuex. And inside of our store, we'll need to create an event object to store the event that gets returned in our state. Then we'll create a set event mutation. This will simply set the value of our event. And then we need a fetch event action. We send in the ID parameter for this action, and we'll paste in what we cut earlier. When we get back from the API call, we'll commit our set event mutation and set that equal to the data that's returned. And lastly, we'll delete this because we want to send in the parameter ID into the getEvent method. Now inside of event show, once again, we can delete the import event service and import map state. We can delete our reactive data since we're using Vuex state. Then inside our created lifecycle hook, we'll dispatch our fetch event action, sending in the ID that we want to access. And then lastly, inside computed, we'll use our map state helper to access our event data. Back in the browser, now if I click on an event, sure enough, it does the API call inside Vuex and shows me the data for each event. You might notice here that we're loading the same data twice. The data we pull on our event list is the same data that we're using in our event show. So we're doing 2 API calls when maybe we could get away with doing 1. How might we implement this? At the bottom of our store.js, you might have noticed we have a getter, which looks at our events array and tries to find a particular event and return that. We should be able to use this. So in our fetch event action, we can access our getters here at the top, and then we'll use the getEventById getter to see if we can find this event. If we do find this event, then let's go ahead and commit the setEvent mutation, sending in the event we found. Otherwise, we can go fetch the event, just like we were before. If we jump back into our browser and call up the Network tab on DevTools and click on a particular event, let's look to see if it did an API call. And it looks like it didn't. All it did was load our feathersprite.svg, but it did no API call since it already had the data, which was retrieved when we listed out our events. We saved an API call. Let's review, or should I say, let's review X. In this lesson, we took our events list and we integrated it with Vuex. We then figured out how to do pagination with Vuex, and then we took our events show page and converted it to use Vuex with our actions, mutations, and our state. If you've been coding along with us, great job, keep up the great work. If you haven't, the best way I learn is by doing. And so feel free to take all the example code. You can see it below this video, all written out so that you can type through our example. In the lesson resources, you'll see our starting code if you want to start coding along with us, and our ending code for this lesson in case you do something wrong or you want to proof it, or if you want to just do the extra credit, you'll find links to just the extra credit code if you want to download that, get it running, and try it out. See you in the next lesson. Hi, I'm Greg Pollock, and in this lesson, we're going to be taking a second look at Vuex. No, we're not. That's not what we're doing. Don't worry, it won't all be like this. Here in the event list file, no. Here in the event list, view single file, no. I've got your starting code, oh. Hey, I just choked on hello. That's what I.